Rikki Longino, they, them, is a gardener, seed keeper, community organizer, and mycelial advocate based in the Wasatch Valley. Their love of fungi began as a child growing up in the temperate rainforest of Olympia, Washington, which is a beautiful place. As an adult, Rikki has traveled to mycological gatherings such as the New Moon Mycology Summit, which might be happening again this year, Mycosymbiotics, which is definitely happening, the Midwest Women's Herbal Gathering, Present or Vend, which I think is also happening. Rikki is currently in the process of co-creating a mycology-inspired tarot deck called Fruiting Bodies. Rikki works at the Salt Lake City Public Library, running a seed library and community garden. And they also collaborate with the Mobile Moon Co-op, a femme and queer-led collective herb farm and apothecary right here in the Salt Lake Valley. So tonight's talk is titled Mushrooms and Community, Healing the Colonial Industrial Model. And I'll speak to the description. The description is, fungi are emergent systems of mutual aid that spread for miles underground, connecting, translating, nourishing, and transforming the world beneath our feet. We have entered an era of mass extinction, anthropogenic climate change, and global industrialization. In this presentation, we will explore ways to deconstruct and myceliate systems of destruction in order to imagine and enact a better future. Fungi constantly adapt to changes in their environments. They cleanse toxins, sequester carbon, and supply necessary life or death to those around them. Fungi do not operate in heterosexual, cisgender, or hierarchical systems, and they seem to do so with a lively sense of humor and flamboyant style moreover. We will focus on 4 fungi who exemplify community healing: Pleurotus, edible remediator; Reishi, medicinal adaptogen; Amanita, poisonous mycorrhizal; and Psilocybe, psychedelic relational. Just those 4 descriptions are really intriguing to me. Psychedelic relational, poisonous mycorrhizal. It's like 2 terms that you don't really see like correlated together very often. So I'm super interested to hear Rikki's presentation, and I'm so excited that we get to dive a little bit into a little more into the depths of seeing fungi as a language, yeah, kind of thinking about them maybe more so, maybe a little bit less with a hard science lens, which I think is very important for us to do and important for a club to share. So without further ado, please welcome Rikki Longino. Oh, and I will say that if we have questions, please type them into the chat. And then at the end, it'll be about an hour-long presentation. And then at the end, we can either you can unmute yourselves and you can verbalize your questions, or we can read them from the chat. So let's welcome Rikki Longino.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm just going to share my screen and start the presentation. Let's see, do that. Okay. How does that look? Can everybody hear me? See everything? Great. Well, hello. As you now know, my name is Rikki Longino, and I'm so grateful to the Mushroom Society of Utah for having me today. And I'm very excited for this opportunity to share my perspective and my lived experiences on these exquisite guardians of our planet, fungi. For any curious attendees, I'm happy to connect with anybody interested in getting involved in the projects that I'm involved with. I will be speaking to them a little bit during the presentation and sharing contact info at the end. And as Gabriela said, I'm also happy to do some Q&A at the end of the presentation. So thank you for joining me. So let's start by defining fungi. The mushrooms that we eat, that we photograph, that we collect, and most widely recognized are actually referred to as the fruiting bodies. You may know this. They're really helpful for us in many ways. And as we begin to understand the vast realm of fungi, we'll use the fruiting bodies. But really, mushrooms are much broader than that. And to just use the fruiting body is, it's too narrow of a view to explore the fungal kingdom. So I say kingdom versus kingdom because in working with mushrooms, I've learned that kingdoms sort of represent patriarchy and the colonial ruling class, whereas we should respond to the needs of our kin with tenderness and compassion and resources, the king is perhaps somebody we should eat so that his nutrients might be recycled back into the ecosystem. But in all seriousness, the organisms on this planet share power. Everything has a role to play, and relationships are constantly shifting. The anthropocentric worldview kind of colonially puts men at the top of the world looking down, as the graphic on the left shows. And in reality, he is just a part of the system. If he didn't have the protozoa and the mice and the cows and the mushrooms, he wouldn't exist. So I really want to start by portraying mushrooms as holders of this ecological model. What are fungi? Fungi constantly adapt to changes in their environments. So they are cleansers of toxins. And in this era, we've entered this era of mass extinction, of natural disasters due to anthropogenic climate change and global industrialization. It's undeniable at this point. Mushroom help us explore and kind of myceliate these systems of destruction in order to imagine a future that is better. Fungi are emergent systems of mutual aid that spread underground. This is a morel mushroom. So after wildfires, which can be incredibly destructive, these fungi proliferate. This is a morel that I found in the mountains of central Montana in 2019. And as we see more and more fires kind of spreading through our ecosystems, these networks underground of these mycorrhizal morels kind of are beings that emerge after that destruction because of their resilient networks that exist underground. A third kind of definition of fungi is that they do not operate in heterosexual, cisgender, or hierarchical systems. The way that they reproduce is, they form hyphae after their spores replicate, and those are just filaments of fungal matter. So in order to reproduce, they just form mycelium, and they just combine with other hyphae, with other filamentous forms. Whereas humans reproduce with a sperm and an egg, it sort of like creates this gender binary. But in reality, like, mushrooms kind of show us that reproduction isn't necessarily rooted in that binary. And when I think about family, kind of my assessment and understanding of family is less like a tree where you have like separate trees, family trees that, you know, come together in union. And rather it's more like a network of connection. You know, tree branches can't actually bind together in the way that hyphae or mycelial filaments can. So when we look at reproduction and try to understand the context that fungi use to reproduce, I think it can help us understand and embody the queerness and kind of the beauty of that in our modern lives. Here are a few images of some really beautiful and like queer and bizarre looking mushrooms to me: earth stars, lepiota, and stinkhorn. They all have like vaguely genitalia or like nude looks to me, and I just love that they just sprout out of the ground. Very sexy, very flamboyant, and just purely natural. So I want to talk about 4 fungi today that exemplify community healing: Pleurotus mushrooms, Ganoderma, Amanita, and Psilocybe. They all have different roles that I've identified as important as tools for us to understand how mushrooms can help us digest, process, and start to heal the colonial model that we exist in, that is rooted in materialism and consumption. So I will begin with Pleurotus, which are edible remediators. This is an image of some Pleurotus oyster mushrooms growing in my parents' backyard. They went to a workshop with Wasatch Community Gardens back in 2017. And they just plugged some spawn into an oak just oak log. And they kind of left it in the backyard for a year, and they thought, well, I don't know if that's going to work. And then after a year, it started fruiting. And for 2 entire years, it fruited regularly throughout the gardening season. Through the growing season, it was like every week or so, they would get an incredible flush of mushrooms, and they love making stir fry. And from this single log, basically the mass of the log converted completely into oyster mushrooms. So I want to share this little video with you to kind of talk about mycophagy or fungivorism. Let's see, it takes a little second here to load. It's pretty silly, but I think describes mushrooms. It well. Living mushrooms. Sorry, we'll start it over. Okay, ready? Living people eat dead mushrooms. Living mushrooms eat dead people. Dead people. Mushrooms eat dead people. Living people eat. It's really short, but I think there's something about fungivorism that is important for us to understand how we perceive mushrooms as being dead. And when we eat them, it's like, oh yeah, we just eat dead mushrooms like we eat other dead things. But the reality is that mushrooms also eat dead people, and we are part of this cycle. Let's see. Sorry, I keep losing this spot. Mushrooms vary a lot in flavor profile, texture, toxicity, like the way that they impact our bodies. And Pleurotus is one with exceptional edibility. In the wild, you can easily recognize them by their fan-shaped and the way that their gills kind of meld into the stem, the stipe. The smell is also really distinctive. It's sort of fishy, like seafood, but then with this anise smell as well. And just like the process of eating mushrooms or the experience of eating mushrooms is sort of, it's similar to eating meat. Like the mushroom is more closely related to people or to the animal kingdom than to the plant kingdom. So, it has like more of a fleshy consistency. These are some photos of mushrooms in 2021. The photos on the left are king oysters that were grown in Kingston, New York. They're from a farmer's market. And the ones on the right are actually chicken of the woods, which is a really delightful edible mushroom. Let's see. So the story is that my friend Luca and I went on a hike, and we were in upstate New York, and we found this beautiful nest of chicken of the woods mushrooms. And as you can see, I was delighted. I was overjoyed at having found these sulfur shelf mushrooms, which if you've never had them, they taste so much like chicken and the texture is incredible. And so we harvested some, we left some behind to continue to sporulate and exist in the forest, and we sang them a little song. And then we went to the farmer's market afterwards, and we gravitated towards the mushroom booth, of course, and they had these beautiful boxes of oyster mushrooms that they had cultivated. And we actually did a little exchange. We did a trade of chicken of the woods for oyster mushrooms. I think that what this speaks to is the way that food is, and sharing food is sort of the foundation of all living cultures on this planet. And whether it's mushroom eating dead people and proliferating, or people exchanging mushrooms to both eat, there is this kind of unity and culture building that emerges from sharing food. So that's a role that mushrooms play. Mycoremediation. So Pleurotus are, in addition to being a food source, are kind of the most widely studied mycoremediators, myco meaning mushroom, remediation meaning healing. There are many studies that are peer-reviewed that have shown that Pleurotus mushrooms expunge environmental pollutants. There was a study specifically in which there was diesel contaminated soil, like drenched. The soil was completely full of diesel. And Pleurotus that were inoculated there in the soil broke down the petroleum hydrocarbons, and kind of before and after, 93% of the hydrocarbons had been completely digested and turned into organic matter, basically composted by these Pleurotus. So I wanted to also share this picture of an oyster mushroom that we found on a poplar log. It was a cottonwood that I don't know, it's just really inspired by this mushroom. It sort of looks like a super remediator angel hawk to me. And I just think that oyster mushrooms are some of the most like incredible, you know, keepers of our soil, keepers of our planet, and keepers of our bodies. I'll speak next to Ganoderma mushrooms, medicinal adaptogens. So Ganodermas they have a lot of distinctive attributes. Their other names are Reishi or Lingji. They are shelf fungus and they're often found on dead or dying wood. They have this distinctive kind of brown to reddish varnish and a very lacquered surface. So it's often like shiny and reflective if you kind of wipe it a little bit. They're astonishing. They can take a lot of different forms. They can look like that shelf mushroom, that conch on the left, but they can also kind of branch in these antler shapes. So that's how you know it's a Ganoderma. These mushrooms are really special to me. I think that I have built relationships with them over time. Because within days, in the last 2 years, my maternal grandmother and my paternal grandfather died. And when I went to say goodbye to them, within days after their deaths, I was walking in the woods and I found these 2 mushrooms. The photo on the left is a golden reishi found in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the one on the right is also a reishi found in outside of Sarasota, Florida, which were their final resting places. And I feel this strong connection with them. You know, those are the only reishi that I've found in the wild. And I felt like, you know, there were other mushrooms around them, and I felt like the medicine of these mushrooms was okay for me to harvest. And I think when wild harvesting mushrooms, I tend to be, I kind of like leave them in the forest, especially if it's the only one or if it's in an area that is sort of depleting, because the roles that I think these mushrooms can play in the forest is very medicinal, even though it has uses for our bodies as well. So I will share a bit about kind of Ganoderma's medicinal properties for humans. Basically, the Ganoderma are found all over the world, and their properties are by and large the same. They have been shown to help prevent cancer, HIV, but also just everyday stress and fatigue. There's more and more studies coming out about how powerful these Ganodermas are for helping our bodies adapt. They're called adaptogens because with so many new kind of environmental toxins and stresses in our lives, these mushrooms are sort of able to actually remind our bodies to kind of break down and let go of cells that might be replicating in harmful ways. This process is known as apoptosis. It's when our cells start to replicate and mutate and become cancerous. Apoptosis is this natural cell death. So what Ganoderma kind of do is remind our bodies how to die a little bit, and actually how to kind of let go of things that aren't supposed to be in our bodies. Interestingly enough, they also, to a certain degree, do that to the trees. So if parts of trees are dying, or if the trees have already died and are on the ground, that's when you'll see reishi mushrooms starting to grow. So in some ways, like the reishi acts like a death doula, kind of slowly identifying the parts of the tree that have started to die, and kind of, I almost imagine like the wisdom of that tree. If it's a 100-year-old tree, like, and it starts to have reishis on it, you know that that tree's timeline is limited. And it kind of speaks to these ancient ideas recycled through generations, and the ways that we have to adapt the wisdom of our elders to our modern everyday lives. I want to speak a little bit about this tarot project that I'm doing with my partner in Cremini. That's Una Goodman on the left and me on the right. It was a different patch of chicken of the woods. We 3 years ago, we met at it was 2016, so it was like 6 years ago. We met at the Radical Mycology Convergence, and we just like hit it off, and so much creative energy. And years later, we were like, maybe we should do a tarot deck about mushrooms. Kind of, we kept finding all these connections between the different mushrooms and the major arcana they corresponded with. And so we're now working on this deck. Una is an incredible illustrator. You can see her illustration on the left. And we're both total fungi fanatics. And the card that we associated the Ganodermas with is actually card number 5 in the traditional arcana, which is the Hierophant. This isn't actually an image of it. This is sort of like an overall image of our tarot project, because we're still working on that card. But we kind of are reinterpreting the tarot. So instead of calling it the Hierophant, who is kind of a stodgy old white dude who represents like power, religious leadership, and kind of authoritative masculinity, we are kind of reinterpreting it as tradition. And I will share with you just a little bit of the description that we worked on for this card. Tradition calls you to seek out time-tested bodies of knowledge, letting the lived experience of elders guide your way. Gather your ancestors, the old things, and absorb their lessons. Devote yourself to the path. Focus on the ways in which you belong to your lived experiences and to the solid structures in your life. Look back while moving forward. So that to me is kind of the medicine of Ganoderma, and also kind of the reimagining of the Hierophant in the tarot. So now I want to share with you about Amanitas, the poisonous and mycorrhizal aspects of those fruiting bodies. This picture on the right is a group of friends on a mushroom foray in the Pacific Northwest. And on the left is a close-up of what we were all looking at. This is an Amanita muscaria gasowi. So usually Amanita muscaria are red, but the varietal of gasowi is kind of more orange and yellow. So this kind of Amanita it has neurotoxins that are toxic but not deadly. And I want to talk a little bit about poison or toxicity. Just the fact that something that I have worked with a lot in my exploration of fungal and herbal medicine is that the only difference between a medicine and a poison is dosage. So this is Amanita muscaria, or fly Amanita. and it has kind of an intimate history of human use. There is evidence that people indigenous to Siberia and Eastern Europe used Amanita in ritual. Shamans from the region harvested the fruiting bodies and carried them in sacks over their shoulders. And when the snow piled up, they would have to enter their homes through the chimney and dry the mushrooms in stockings over the fireplace. Sound familiar? Our co-opted Christian familiar here, Santa, shows up at the darkest hour of the year, right around the winter solstice. Reindeer in the Siberian region are also known to ingest Amanita muscaria with observed changes in behavior. The psychoactive compounds in Amanita muscaria intensify when they're actually processed in the endocrine systems of the animals. So basically, reindeer have evolved to actually drink one another's urine after they have consumed Amanita mushrooms. You can look it up. And so for some reason, I don't know why the urine drinking has been left out of the traditional Christmas story, but regardless, the Amanita can cause hallucinations and delirium when consumed. And those qualities can either bewilder or enlighten the spirit of the beholder. I think it's important to recognize that what might feel poisonous, like a purging effect, can be harmful to the system, and especially if you're in a context that is unfamiliar. But I think that there can also be a degree of enlightenment or healing, and especially looking at traditional kind of ancient healing practices. It's interesting just to acknowledge that poison can be somewhat of a healing thing as well, especially when looking at kind of our modern world and the distance that we have from nature. I also want to talk about a different kind of Amanita. These Amanita phalloides are deadly poisonous. They are the leading cause of mushroom-related death. Basically, people mistake them for meadow mushrooms, or, the way they look is like pretty, unless you know mushrooms, you're going to see that and be like, yeah, it looks like a normal mushroom. You can really tell by the way that they have those vulvas, the kind of the egg-like sacs that they emerge from, that they're Amanitas. If these are consumed, they damage cells throughout the body. They attack the vital internal organs, and they're deadly. This is kind of what you get warned about when you foray for mushrooms and don't know your mushrooms very well. I also want to talk about how Amanitas are mycorrhizal. So when I see a deadly toxic mushroom like Amanita phalloides, I just feel like it has this aura of danger that I should not even touch it. I should leave it alone. And when you look at the way that the the mycelium of these Amanita mushrooms kind of interact with the ecosystems, the underground ecosystems around them, their root systems actually kind of bond with the root systems of plant roots around them. So you can see in this graphic on the left that in the middle is a plant root, and around it there's little kind of root hairs coming off. And then the fungal mantle is this kind of coating of mycelium that actually kind of bonds and enters the plant through what's called the Hardig net. So this creates an exchange of nutrients, of information, and really creates a network so that the plants of the forest are all connected, and messages can flow between, a tree on one side of the forest and a tree on the other side of the forest, or a tree and a little shrub. And that connection, as we know, here gathered together, like communication and connection is so important. It's like the identity that we all share has to exist because of this connection, the root and the matter that surrounds it. So when I think about mushrooms like Amanitas, I feel like they are there to sort of protect the forest, protect that mycorrhizal connection. And sometimes that means like being lethal, being deadly. And I think that is a very powerful kind of relationship. The tarot card that we identified for this is the Tower. So in the traditional tarot, the Tower is this like people being flung from a high place, and there's this kind of collapse. In our deck, we are exploring it as disaster, because whether you're looking at the industrial model and the way that capitalism is kind of forcing us into systems of destruction, or even natural disasters, I think it speaks to the crumbling of structures in order to then rebuild. And I'll read a section from our description of the tarot as well, of disaster. This card represents the crumbling of colonial structures. Natural disaster deconstructs things that have been established by industrial processes. This card may indicate a cataclysmic ending, apocalypse, crisis, revolution. Unjust or inaccurate systems of oppression must end somehow. Remember that in crisis, there is also liberation. When catastrophe strikes, the imagination can flourish and go beyond what was ever thought possible before. So, our final exploration of fungi is psilocybe. What a cute drama queen of a mushroom. So this image is a Psilocybe cubensis mushroom growing out of a dried cow patty in rural Florida, just found in January 2021. The term psychedelic means the expansion of consciousness. So the fact that these mushrooms contain psilocybin that induces a psychedelic experience makes them a very special kind of mushroom. I think the expansion of consciousness is something that we're often afraid of. We're afraid of diving into that realm because it's kind of beyond our control. Our consciousness is something that our ego puts walls around so that we can function. So these are images of various kind of different forms of mushrooms that produce psilocybin or psilocin. The one on the left there is some cultivated psilocybin mushrooms that I got as a stock photo from the internet. And, I think that environment for mushrooms produces a certain kind of expansion of consciousness. The image in the middle are some wild Paniolus mushrooms. That is a mushroom that contains psilocin, not psilocybin, and smaller concentrations. So there are hundreds of different kinds of kind of psychedelic mushrooms of varying concentrations that can be found in nature. And then the photo on the right is another Psilocybe cubensis, also wild harvested. So you can see there's sort of a similarity in the way that these psilocybes grow. They have that like kind of golden brown cap, and then the way that the stem kind of is can be a little wobbly coming up, and the fact that they grow out of a substrate that is kind of like earthy, cow patties or brown rice. These are substrates that kind of contain a lot of nutrients. But also, the fact that psilocybin grow out of cow patties is sort of like profane, but also sacred. My family, my background, my grandfather was Hindu and grew up in India, and the relationship to cows there is like so holy. And I can't help but wonder if there was like some connection to psychedelic mushrooms in India that kind of generated this relationship. And these photos are from my father's family's cattle ranch. And, you know, these are like cows that go to feedlots. And I feel like there's something to be said for that paradox of like cows being these like sacred, holy animals that whose waste products generate this like sacred medicine. And then cows being the, you know, a function of an industrial system and what we kind of mindlessly consume. I want to kind of go back to early humans, kind of that relationship that I described with, you know, India and the sacred cow. I think early humans had a relationship with fungi. Terence McKenna wrote a pretty famous article, or had a hypothesis called the stoned ape theory, where he posited that psilocybin caused the primitive brain's information processing capabilities to rapidly reorganize. And then that kind of kickstarted our evolution of cognition, which led to early art, language, and technology, which is sort of what's written on the walls of caves and other archaeological records. You know, this isn't a proven theory, but I think that people's relationships with plants and fungi in their early evolution is undeniable. And so the thought that mushrooms might have had a role in our evolution seems pretty likely. Jump forward a few thousand years, there's a lot of, you know, kind of skipping over a lot of history, but I want to talk about colonization, expansion of consciousness as exploitation of the earth. When I think about colonization that happened in the 1400s, when European settlers came and, you know, just took what is now called the Americas by conquest, in a way that was expansion of consciousness, but it was also enrobed in a lot of ego, a lot of kind of Christian ideologies. The discovery of America was not unlike a psychedelic trip. The way they colonized the Americas resulted in the extermination of 90% of native people and continues to expand in the urbanization and habitat and species loss that we see every day. If you look at the right, this is what colonization in the 2000s looks like. We lose 150 to 200 species every day on this earth. And this is not the gentle assisted suicide of the reishi mushroom that regenerates and blossoms into new life, but rather more like a Candida auris, which is a deadly emerging fungus that presents a serious global health threat. It infects the body via bloodstream and central nervous system and just shuts it down. You know, if we follow the mycelium of the current fruiting body of our society, we find a montage of dreams deferred, of slavery, exploitation, and genocide. Mushrooms can be like that. The terminology of colonization is thrown around in mycological circles to describe the way that spawn take over a petri dish of agar-agar or spread through a dead log. And we see that in the form of racism in the police state and military takeover. We see it in fossil fuel extraction and deforestation on a mass scale. It's a lot to digest. And I think that we have to look the problem in the face and myceliate it in order to transform it. So I want to talk a little bit about relational integrity and the power of emergent community. In the same way that psilocybin are psychedelic and they can cause us to be aware of our own egos and the container that we exist in, and then dissolve that in kind of a catastrophic way. Fungi can also connect us to each other and to the earth. The use of magic mushrooms or fungi containing psilocybin or psilocin, it comes from a long line of indigenous knowledge. Maria Sabina, pictured on the left, was a shaman in the Maya region of what is now known as southern Mexico. She was a daughter of campesinos, or country folk, and she was skilled in communicating through mushrooms to speak to God. She was the first contemporary curandera to share her healing medicine and rituals with Westerners. I'm sure there were thousands of other mushroom healers whose names I don't know and I may never know. And it was because of Western expansion that she is a person that I know, and whose name is somewhat well known. The photo on the right is kind of ancient Mayan art that has been said to be inspired by the use of mushrooms in ritual and ceremony. It seems to me that the deep mycelium of psilocybin is deep in history, and the people who carry the Mazatec language and culture in their blood lineages have a connection to this medicine that people of European descent do not necessarily in this context. But regardless of who really should have access to this sacred medicine, its decriminalization and scientifically proven success at treating depression and addiction and symptoms of other chronic illnesses have caused it to run wild through our industrial system. My hope for the future is that we eventually come full circle and return to the earth. Mushrooms can help us remember how to relate to all life on earth, and they can remind us to treat the problem as the solution. The photos here are from a group called the POC Fungi community, and they empower communities of color. They're based in Kumaya territory, which is now known as San Diego. And their goal is to empower people of color and communities whose roots are in these kind of ritualistic places to re-enter nature, to come back to relationship with the land and with the plants. And I think that things like this are so vital for us to remember our ancestors and where we come from. Seems like a really big part of our relationship. The Mobile Moon Co-op and the Salt Lake City Public Library are two projects that I'm involved in that I hope also kind of embody the teachings of relating to the earth and relating to the community in a way that is healing, and also kind of creates alternatives to industrial capitalism and material consumption. The Mobile Moon Co-op is a femme and queer-led collective that aids communities and ecosystems through education, empowerment, and botanical stewardship. We make products every month that come from the earth, and we provide them for our community members. 30% of all of our proceeds go back into the community, often for groups or organizations like POC Fungi community. Our members who support us help us decide who in the community is in need of assistance or is doing the kind of work that reflects our mission. It's a form of land back, it's a form of reparations, it's a form of anti-colonialism that we feel is essential to creating a future that we want to be a part of. We come together on the land every Sunday from 11 to 4. We share a meal, we work with our hands in the dirt, and the collective kind of grows more every day. The Salt Lake City Public Library has a seed library. This is kind of the other thing that I do. We nourish the community by cultivating connections and exchanging resources and providing educational experiences. Essentially, we are able to collect seeds from the community and redistribute them with the hopes that people plant the seeds, grow them out, harvest them again, and donate them back to the commons, so that we can all share in the genetic resilience of seed keeping and seed saving. We also have a community garden where I'm working on kind of building a curriculum that teaches people about how to garden, how to build soil, how to use edible perennials and grow mushrooms, and so that they might have the skills to then take leadership and go on myceliating the world and creating more green spaces that make that kind of impact and resist the colonial takeover of our land and the world that sustains us. So I want to end my presentation with this little reflection on magic. In speaking about psilocybin, I think that there is something sacred that exists in this mushroom. And this is an illustration that Una made, kind of depicting the magic. Perhaps this is a nudge to play with perspective, to open, to release into expansion. Perhaps you have been devoted to the parts of life that are logical but rooted in exploitation. Can you see the parts of your society that are materially wealthy but spiritually impoverished? Magic is the ability to choose spiritual awareness over material gain. The magical qualities of subversion and shape-shifting have the capacity to both distort reality and make the invisible visible, transform silence to word, convene disparate dust to full form, change student to master, or everything in reverse. Let this be a reminder to delve into the realm of eternal mutability, go underground, accept the opportunity to dance, create, and expand the charge of electricity that emerges in the presence of passion and imagination. Go forth with your knowledge and all the resources you possess. Share freely, and your community will come. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you want to get in touch, the Mobile Moon Co-op is one of the emails that I read, and then the website is there and our social media. And then the Salt Lake City Public Library, if you want to reach out to me that way and get involved with the seed library, you can do that. Yeah, I would love to see what questions you have. I see that there are some comments.
Yay! That was so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely have some comments and questions in the chat. As a reminder, you can enter them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask any questions. That was just so beautiful, Rikki. I want to just briefly mention that I'm so happy you used the term kingdom, because that's definitely something that I use and like to spread, because it's easier than making queendom a thing. You just drop the G and kingdom's there. It's like our kin is so like identifiable with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I want to mention that your Reishi story was really sweet and hit home for me, because I had a very personal close death this past year. And when I went on a walk in the area where this person died, I found a reishi mushroom in the middle of the Utah park, kind of out of nowhere, a Ganoderma lucidum, which strangely grows here because of cultivators. It is escaping cultivation, but I had a really beautiful moment with a reishi mushroom, very similarly to you, that I definitely wanted to share. So that's cool.
Mm. Yeah, I think reishi has definitely jumped out as like a death healer for me. Like, we have so much loss to process right now. I mean, the loss of species alone is it's hard to think about, like losing a species forever, extinction. But then also, people in our lives coming out of a pandemic. I'm sure everybody knows people who aren't coming back. And so using mushroom medicine as a way to process that loss and understand like the gentleness that we need to treat ourselves with when grieving. It's just like a little powerful nugget of love that's like really helpful for grief for me.
Well, we can move to the Q&A on the chat. I see Jess and Matt are here, which is so nice to see them. They were at our survey this past weekend. And would you like me to read your question, or would you like to speak to your question?
Yeah, we were just curious about when you were touching on the mycoremediation slides, just wondering if your cooperative is involved in any projects doing anything like that. Would you be a part of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would love to do more with mycoremediation. I actually kind of, it's not with the co-op, but more with the library garden, actually. The downtown library is right in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City. It's pretty toxic. Like, Library Square is full of like just a lot of intense energy. It's right next to 400 South, the tracks line, like sort of a lot of cars spewing stuff into our community garden. And in 2020, kind of we had extra budget and we couldn't actually have community gardeners in the space because of the pandemic. And so we decided we wanted to do like a kind of a sidewalk edible landscaping garden. And we were able to kind of replace a big strip of grass kind of on 400 South with a garden that had like service berries and like all kinds of different herbs and mints and hardy kiwis. And so we planted those, but we also were like, okay, we got to get a bunch of compost for this soil. And we just used compost from the city, but we laid down like a good chunk of compost, and then mushrooms started just sprouting out of this composted kind of sheet mulched grass next to 400 South. And they're just like this standard like horse mushrooms, kind of like they're an agaricus, and they're edible, but like I don't know, I haven't done like a scientific lab test on like what the flesh of the mushrooms contain, but I have this feeling that they're like pulling all these heavy metals out of the soil, and like all of the car stuff that is just like built into the soil over the years, these mushrooms just like keep popping up, and I just feel like you're healing this soil. I think energetically as well. I mean, there's a lot of unsheltered individuals in that area, and people will sort of like walk by the garden like yelling angry things, but like when they see the garden, I feel like people kind of visibly calm down and like stop and smell the flowers. And like I think when they see the mushrooms, it's just like there's something happening here, there's something transformative. So it's a long answer. I see that Katie Lawson is on this call, and she has a really great kind of community mycology project that's rooted in, it's like beautiful kind of citizen science work that I really admire. So if you were here for Katie's talk or want to check them out, it's Fungal Focus, and I would love to work more with Katie on some mycoremediation stuff if she's down.
That was a really good question. I'd actually, if it's okay, I want to see if Katie has a moment to at all respond to any kind of project she might be opening herself to, because I know she's been kind of thinking about some mycoremediation projects, and I'm happy that there's kind of a space like this where all of us can kind of collaborate and envision some stuff together. So Katie, do you want to speak at all to your projects you're looking at?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a research garden in South Salt Lake, and I am looking at, I've inoculated, so I have 8 beds, and I have 4 control beds basically, and then some are inoculated with Pleurotus pulmonarius and some are inoculated with wine caps to try and see if they improve the fungal content in the soil. But then also I work with the city on the Food Equity Advisory Board, and they kind of offhandedly mentioned that it was like total side note. They're like, oh, we have this new community garden, but it's got arsenic and benzopyrene. And so I was like, oh, wait, let me do it. Let me help. Let me help. I can help. And they, it's the city. So it's like, well, we have to send your name to so-and-so and don't get too excited. We're probably just going to dig up 3 feet of soil and throw it away. It's like, okay, but if it's a problem there, this is right down the street from my house. I'm thinking if it's a problem there, this is probably a widespread issue across the city. So I'm working more on that too. The first step is seeing what are the most viable methods for producing massive amounts of mycelium, because it requires, you know, more than kind of home scale cultivation. So I'll be working on that and some other things in the research garden in South Salt Lake. If anyone is like interested in, I don't know, talking about it, sharing ideas, telling me if anyone has contaminated soil that I can do some bench tests with, as opposed to waiting for the city to let me do it. My email is fungalfocusutah.com. And Rikki, I'd love to work more with you too. I think you're awesome. Your presentation was great.
Thank you. Thanks
Cool.
for that tag team.
Yeah, everybody, myceliate. I'm going to read the other people's questions and then loop back around to my last question. So Dejan asks, how can we get involved with the Mobile Moon Co-op?
Yeah, Dejan, please come down. We're open 11 to 4 every Sunday. And I'm actually here right now. I live in a school bus that is converted into my home, but also there's like a little tea shop over here, and apothecary, and then the garden is over here in front of me. We have chickens. The back area, we have an outdoor kitchen. We have multiple ways that you can become more involved, like depending on your skills and your interests. So we have like membership tiers. These are the people who help us determine who we want to be fundraising for and supporting in the community. Sometimes it's like, you know, we've fundraised for the Utah Abortion Fund in the past, which like today feels like extra heavy. Oh yeah, it's 2551 South Hempstead Street. It's basically the Jordan River is really close by and Redwood Road is over here, and it's 2551 South. So it's really accessible. The train tracks stop right here, and you can bike here via the Jordan River Trail. So yeah, if you want to get your hands in the dirt, come on a Sunday. If you can't make it Sunday, just reach out and we can find a time in a way that we can get you involved if it sounds like fun.
Cool. And yeah, Dejan's a great person. So I'm sure you two will cross paths pretty soon. Also, the closing event for the Utah Fungi Fest on Sunday, May 15th, is going to be held at the Mobile Moon Co-op. So if you'd like to come check it out, then it's a good opportunity to also hang out with some mushroom people.
Yeah.
Cameron, do you want to ask your question verbally, or do you want me to ask it?
Yeah, I can ask it.
Cool.
So I caught the metaphor, the tarot card metaphor for all of the various examples, except for the first one. I didn't catch what your Pleurotus tarot card metaphor was. Maybe there isn't one yet.
Yeah, so we have like 22 mushrooms that like fit the 22 major arcana of the tarot in a way that like felt really good. And we found that Pleurotus was like too large of a category in a way, because we, you know, all of our cards tend to have like kind of specific like Psilocybe cubensis, and like there's like an exact species. But for oyster mushrooms, we don't know if we want to do the whole undertaking of like 78 card tarot decks. But if we do, I think what we'll do is like, the way the tarot is there's 22 major arcana, which are the archetypes. And then it's sort of like a deck of cards. So there's 4 suits. So what we're thinking is if we go in and pursue the rest of the minor arcana, that Pleurotus will be like a whole category of like edible fungus that represent the pentacles. So
That's interesting.
Well, I'm excited to see the final result, and maybe are you going to be offering readings when they're done? Is that kind of the goal? Yeah,
exactly. Cool. The cards are currently, you can like pre-order them but just be warned that it's like a very long process. Like the way that Una and I work together is like, we really want to make sure that like each card is filled with intention, and Una makes these like the illustration of magic is like this big. So she does these full scale paintings. And so the time frame for the tarot is like, could be a long time, could be like many months before it's ready. But if you're interested, you can pre-order a deck online, and that'll help us kind of like motivate to get it out into the world.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Katie. See ya.
Cool. Yeah. Una's illustrations are so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Very detailed. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll ask my last question, which is, I'm just personally curious if you've ever come across any ways in which Indigenous people in the Utah area have lived with fungi in particular, if you've heard any stories or come across anything.
That's a really good question. And in my work with Indigenous people and communities in Utah, which is, you know, I've lived here for 9 years, and I've been really interested in like land back and understanding a deeper history of colonial settlement in this area. I understand the Utah, the Wasatch Valley is sort of a gathering place where Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute peoples actually kind of convened, and it was like a trading place. It was an intersection of cultures and resources. And when the Mormon settlers came, they sort of said like, oh, the valley isn't a populated area. This must be the place where we belong. And then there were, of course, like massacres and you know, when the Indigenous people were like, actually, this is like a sacred place for us, you know, the response was very harsh and violent. And to this day, the Indigenous people that I know and that I organize with in the Salt Lake Valley tend to be kind of like urban and have like a perspective of like being part of like the urban Salt Lake community, and they aren't necessarily like of this land. And it's really it's hard. I mean, I've worked with Utah Diné-Bikéyah and just like in various capacities, and it's actually really difficult to find like the history of this place and people who actually whose ancestors lived on this land. And so, I mean, I'm really interested to know that, and talking to Mario Ceballos, who started the POC fungi community. It's a really complicated and tender place to explore, and it's like, I think even the mentality of like scientifically trying to learn about things can be colonial in a way, because it's not necessarily like our knowledge to hold. But at the same time, I think it is really valuable to like empower people to explore and to try to like retain that information and that knowledge. So that was a long answer. But the
No,
short
I love
answer
it.
is no, like I don't actually know what kind of relationships were held between Indigenous people from this area and the fungi, but I want to know. We're working on trying to find ways that the Utah Fungi Fest can like not do land acknowledgement or like some kind of exploration into that, so that we can, you know, like share this knowledge with good conscience, and with the knowledge that we're like putting stuff back into Indigenous sovereignty and the movement of land back, fungi back.
No, I really appreciate it. Just yeah, I mean, I understand you're not of Indigenous, you know, and Indigenous to this place, Utah ancestry, but I appreciate your response and how just, yeah, how much perspective you have with your response. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you, in your experience with relating to people and the place, you've learned that this area of the Wasatch Valley was a little more of what you say, kind of a meeting place of exchange, which is a really fascinating, like, has its own history in that way. So that's just, yeah, it's an interesting thing for me to think about too, because I am from this area. So it's just it's all really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Well, cool. If there's no more questions or comments, thank you everybody so much for joining us this evening. We'll see you at the Utah Fungi Fest. We'll see you at the Mobile Moon Co-op and at any of our upcoming MSU forays and events. Thank you so much to Rikki Longino. It was such a pleasure for MSU to host you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I do want to, yeah. I want to read a few more comments. Mish in the comments says, keep sharing, continue learning, amazing. Cole Hughes, a board member of ours, says, wow, incredible presentation, Rikki. I absolutely love the perspective you brought to the world of fungi. I will be a big proponent of kingdom from now on. Yes, thank you so much. Wendy says, could you please help me with the correct pronunciation of fungi? So there is no correct way of saying it. You can say
It's all good.
fungi, 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 whatever's comfortable with you. Nobody really knows how Latin was spoken. And I have changed my ways multiple times because it's kind of fun. So thank you, Rikki.
My last name is Longino, and so sometimes I just like to say like Fungino.
Exactly. We'll call you Rikki Fungino from now on.
Thanks so much, Rikki.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and I hope that I get to see you all in the future.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Good night.
Good night.